Welcome to another episode of Off the Menu. I'm your host, Vincent Franchini from Tumblr House, here with an extramural, Charles Coulombe.
Extramural?
Yeah.
You mean like beyond the walls?
Yeah, you're beyond everything.
An outsider.
Definitely.
Nose and eyes pressed up against the window looking in.
Yeah.
Not welcome, not included.
Not welcome? I mean, is that part of it?
It could be. It could be. I think a lot depends on who's on the inside of the walls. I think that plays a huge part, frankly. So think of the Holy Father and President Biden.
Okay, probably not welcome then, I guess.
Oh, I see. So now you're speaking for both the Pope and the President. Nice move.
Well, I mean, you are a former papal prisoner.
That is true. I have graduated from that status. Of course, I was held prisoner by John Paul II, who it was much better treatment, I think, than I would have gotten under the present regime. Although maybe Cardinal Becciu is the best person to ask, since I think he's the only prisoner sitting in the Vatican jail right now.
Yeah, but yeah, that's a story from many episodes ago. There is a lot more to it, but we're just going to leave it at that and not explain anymore. So Charles Coulombe, former papal prisoner.
It is true. Held prisoner by John Paul II, no less.
Yeah. All right. So.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, this is the kind of thing that we do live for, just so you know.
All right, so how's your New Year's, Charles?
Well, it is wonderful. Firstly, just in case, for those inclined to think I was prevaricating, I do have my very own Christmas tree. So we've had a tremendous Christmas. I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, that we weren't here with you for St. Stephen's Day or for St. John's Day, but it was simply too hectic both for Don Vincenzo and myself.
Yeah.
Too much going on to coordinate the show. But thankfully, that's not the case now. And we are in the 8th day of Christmas. It's not over. It is New Year's Day. Some of us chose to dress formally. Others took a more, shall I say, casual view of things. No, that's all right. That's quite all right. I wore a white tie last night, and I was I was tempted to do it again tonight. But I was afraid that if I wore a white tie on top of everything else, I just didn't want you to go into a shame spiral.
A shame spiral?
A shame spiral. I didn't want you to do that. So I thought, well, black tie will preserve the formality on my end without making the enabler general of the country feel bad. Because, see, I'm not about making people feel bad, especially not at Christmas time.
Wow. Well, that's very thoughtful and considerate of you, Charles.
It's true. But we did have a tremendous Christmas. We had us lockdown exiles. You know, the best revenge against the regime is to enjoy yourself, despite their best efforts. So we had 6 geese for Christmas dinner, about 30 of us. And just, it was a great time. Then I went up to Vienna for midnight mass, for a Tridentine mass, which was very, very nice. We didn't have the dinner until Christmas Day. I had a Slovak Christmas Eve dinner. No carp, I'm sorry to report, but there were the Vigilia and the not Vigilia. There's a word for them. The round things you have.
Pierogies?
Oplatki.
Oplatki, right.
In the Latin rite, they're like hosts almost, but in the amongst the Eastern Rite Slovakians, they're,
Well,
you
we
know,
have them as rectangles.
really with
That you
a
dip in honey.
yes, yes, yes,
Yeah,
yes.
we always get them as rectangles.
Huh.
That's interesting.
One thing you find about Slovakia, at least I have, is that the country is very diverse. I mean, there's the regions of Slovakia.
Yeah.
It's a little country. It's not very big, really, but the regions are all very different from each other. Their customs are different. Their food ways are different. The songs are different, and yet uh, within the grouping of quote unquote Slovaks ethnically, you have Moravians who are actually Czechs. You have the Wallachians who live in the mountains and whose ancestors were probably Romanian, but they're totally Slavicized. You've got the Ruthenians, the Rusins, who live in the eastern section of the country. I mean, and of course, you can multiply that really by every country in Europe. It's amazing how diverse they are and so tiny in comparison to the great and glorious United States. Well, we tend to be big and homogenous, although there are areas like northern New Mexico and southern Louisiana and the Pennsylvania Dutch country and so on that doesn't quite fit. But by and large, we've got there's a lot more in common between a city dweller in Atlanta and one in Seattle than there is between neighboring valleys in Tyrol.
Wow. So you had a Plotki? When was the last time you've had a Plotki?
Last year,
Oh, okay.
same place. I had dinner. Both years I had dinner with the our chief chaplain and his family. He's a Byzantine Rite priest.
I'm so jealous about the geese. I've always wanted to eat a goose, but they're just I don't know
You
where
know,
to get them over here.
you can actually get them in the markets at Christmas time now. At least you could when I was there last. They're frozen. But I cooked a goose several years running back, 10 years ago. What I was going to say, so we had a Slovak Christmas Eve dinner. It was meatless. Then it
Yeah.
was garlic, raw garlic and the honey. There was a wonderful mushroom soup. It
Oh,
was
that's
just out
typical.
of this world.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was just really, really good. And it was a wonderful evening. Um, really, really wonderful. And then, as I say, I went to mass in Vienna. Then the next day, Christmas Day, there was liturgy in the morning, and then we had this big feast and a lot of caroling. Uh, and Christmas Day was really, really
I thought
wonderful.
you're supposed to be under lockdown.
We are, but you see, the lockdown means out of this compound. It's a big compound.
But you went to Vienna.
Oh, that. Well, you're allowed to go places for religious purposes.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and one of the magazines I write for are working on getting me a press pass so that I'll be able to go virtually anywhere as work, which the lockdown are also allowed.
Nice.
So, I mean, there are ways around things. There's where you are, there's a flourishing trade in phony Max passes.
Really? That's funny.
Well, it's human nature. Whenever you have some moron decide he's going to impose this or that, it's like prohibition. Whenever you do that, there will be a natural response to get around the law. And that's why before you start smacking people around out of your all-knowing stupidity, you should consider if you want to make criminality respectable or not, which is what happened with prohibition. You're the last person I should have to tell this to, but suffice it to say that a lot of I'm going to tailor what I say. I'm going to massage this a little bit. Okay?
Okay.
I don't want you to feel threatened, especially not during the holiday season. But suffice it to say, again, I don't want to bring up bad stories out of family history, but suffice it to say that prior to Prohibition, criminality was looked down on, and so was drunkenness. I mean, people got drunk, but it wasn't considered a great thing. Boom, prohibition comes. What happens? Well, immediately, everybody who's not an idiot has to find some means of getting his booze. And that's where people from certain backgrounds, certain familial groups, clans, if you like that language, filled in. They came in to fill a need, and in so doing became much more respectable socially than they would have been. Because for normal people, you've got a law that's crazy, and you've got the criminal who's bending the law. So suddenly the criminal doesn't seem so bad in comparison to the law.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
And of course, that can have a lot of unfortunate, well, not to everybody, I guess, but I mean, some people benefited. Can you help me here?
Yeah.
I feel suddenly, I feel like I'm on a lake in a boat all of a sudden, and I'm kind of at sea here. All right. Let's just say some people benefited from it both in terms of social status and in financial. Okay. So, anyway, the point is that the other thing that happened was that drunkenness went from being something that people really looked down on to something that was fun. And one of the things people liked to do was get plastered out of their gourds and go up to policemen and be obviously drunk around the cop. But you see, they're not drinking, they have no alcohol on them. And you can only be run in for public drunkenness if you're creating some sort of a disturbance. But if you're just kind of buzzed, and obviously buzzed, hi, officer, everything going all right this evening? Clouds of whiskey odor. And the poor cop is stuck. Well, this became a thing that people love doing. All because of a stupid idiot moron law. And that's why lawmakers, whether in church or state, really should ask themselves if the pursuit of the vision in their pointed heads is really as important as the results it's going to have in the real world. But of course, that requires having leaders who are concerned more about their subjects in the real world than whatever is going on in what passes for their brains.
Yeah, that's way too much thinking.
Especially if you're a very inferior person who is in charge. However, on a happier note, so Christmas went very, very well, and every day there was something. We had a brunch or a potluck of some kind, all the way down to last night. Last night was New Year's Eve, and what a feast! 3 big roasts of beef that were just so well cooked, Chinese dumplings, and lots of sides brought by the various of our inmates here. We had the liturgy in the morning, of course, and then after dinner, we spent some time in front of the Blessed Sacrament. We sang the Te Deum in thanksgiving for the year that's passed, and then we saw Dinner for One, which is a comedy skit. You've heard of it. We saw Dinner for One, and then we did the countdown, popped open bottles of Veuve Clicquot champagne at midnight. Happy New Year. We played Guy Lombardo, sang Old Lang Syne. Then we went out and set off and watched the skyrockets and Roman candles all over beautiful Trumau. I mean, it was really extraordinary fireworks, they're legal here on New Year's, same in Germany. So people set off their own firework displays. Skyrockets. I mean, stuff that, in LA, of course, you're not even allowed the safe and sane fireworks in LA. But the stuff they set off here is the stuff that you generally see in parks. Only everybody's doing it. And the wind blew up pretty severely. So the fireworks are going every which way over the town. It was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. And then afterwards, Vene Creator Spiritus, and I went to bed while the young folks stayed up till God knows when.
Very nice.
It was a great New Year's Eve. And today has been very quiet. We just had liturgy in the morning, or at noon rather, and then a brunch from the leftovers of last night's extravaganza. And we're going to...
Did the owner of Cafe Vest do that?
No, they're closed until the 3rd.
Oh, I thought you might know him personally or something.
Oh, I do know him personally, but I mean, he goes off with his family.
Oh, okay.
Oh, you mean does he set off fireworks?
No, I thought I was wondering if you were dining with him and if he was doing the roast of beef, because I know he's a huge fan of meat.
He is, but no, it was students, classmates of mine.
I see.
They did all the cooking and did a really, really great job. Same with the geese. And then we had we've got 12th night and Epiphany Day. We're going to both celebrate both. The reason being the 12th night is for the Byzantines, they can't eat meat. So what we're going to do on 12th night, apart from we'll have a big dinner, but it'll be all non-meat stuff like Christmas Eve. And then afterwards, we're going to do a reading of Shakespeare's play, 12th night, with people, everybody taking different things. And we're going to have a king cake.
Ooh.
And determine who's to be monarch for the following night's festivities. Because then we're going to have Schweinrouladen, which is slabs of pork with various delicious stuff in them rolled up, chopped, and sort of like pork ho-hos. And we'll sing, and we've been singing carols all through the 12 days. There's always, I mean, it's just been, because we're under lockdown and because a lot of my classmates, this is the first time they've been away from home in their lives. I think it's important to give them the very best 12 days they can possibly have. Mm. So, and we've all done our part toward that end. And I would really heavily encourage, not just now and not just Christmas, but I would encourage all of our beloved viewers, always do that. And even if you're stuck by yourself, heavens, read good material, see old TV shows or movies, look at pictures of the holiday. I mean, celebrate them all around the year to the best of your ability, because they really are glimpses of heaven given us to keep us going in this vale of tears, this world of sin and shadows. They're bright bits of light, like the star over Mordor that gave Sam such a thrill. Well, that's what these wonderful feasts and festivals are like. They're the same with the fasts. I mean, it's certainly true that by the time Candlemas rolls around, I always find my body is screaming for Lent. Beginning to feel that way right now, to tell you the truth. It's like Joan Rivers used to say about Elizabeth Taylor, when they pierced her ears, she bled gravy. That's about how I'm feeling would happen to me if I got my ears pierced, But it's as it should be, ladies and gentlemen. Feasting and fasting, the liturgy and any and all rites, that is our real purpose. And everything else we do, when you celebrate Christmas or Easter or Pentecost or Corpus Christi or whatever it is to the best of your ability, that's a form of worship. Never think it isn't. Just like keeping Lent and Advent as strictly as ever you can. It's all part of the great, wonderful mix. There was a book I read many, many years ago, the first time when I was in junior high, by a fellow called Walsh, It's available online. Curiosities of Popular Customs. And there's Dom Guéranger, who goes into the Latin Rite so well. And there's several books that deal with the Byzantine Rite. And Father Weiser's books on Christmas and Easter and the Christian holy days. I would love to put all that information into a single encyclopedia of a calendar or something like that. You know, I would love to be able to do that.
Mm.
The Cooking with Christ handbook, which handles the same material from a purely culinary point of view. There's Christmas to Candlemas and the Catholic Home and the other stuff that Helen McLaughlin wrote. There's a lot of good stuff out there, ladies and gentlemen. And even if you're not in a position to do it, even reading about it at the proper time helps gives you a sense of the way these things are done. And in a sense, you participate in what everyone else is doing. I mean, think about it. During these 12 days and the build up, every country with Christians in it is, to a greater or lesser degree, more or less consciously celebrating the birth of Christ. It's the one time in the year when everybody stops across the planet, even in Red China, despite the terrible sellout of our brethren there by he who must be obeyed. Despite all that, it is Christmas. And even in times of persecution, when people, have been waiting to hear the knock at the door, they've kept Christmas. Even in the white hell of World War I between the Italians and the Austrians, both sides kept Christmas. So extend that, ladies and gentlemen, to everything, to every holiday, every holy day. Just, it's even better than sports, although sports can accompany it. Which reminds me, it's the morning of New Year's Day right now where you are, yeah?
Yeah.
What about the Rose Parade?
I didn't catch it.
But it's the first time in 2 years.
Is it? Wow, I didn't even
Yes.
notice.
In the San Gabriel Valley, the Tournament of Roses is the big thing. It's like the Mummers Parade in Philadelphia. It's like Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade in New York. It's like the March of the Mobsters in Camden, New Jersey. What? The March of the Mobsters. It's the annual parade of Cosa Nostra bigwigs in Camden. No? All right, well, forget that. Point is that these are great things. And I'll tell you something. I'm going to let you in a little secret about the Tournament of Roses that I'll bet you don't know.
Okay.
Its headquarters is on, oh heavens, what is the name of the street in Pasadena?
Arroyo Parkway?
No, not the Arroyo Parkway. It's very close to it. Millionaires Row. What is it called? The Valley Hunt Club is on the same street. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Their mansion, it's the old Wrigley Mansion, is the headquarters of the Tournament of Roses office, which goes all year. They have tours, but they don't just have tours. For those, of course, you've got to call up and take them, and they're only at certain times of the year. But the mansion has one of the most unknown joys of the San Gabriel Valley. It's Rose Garden.
Hmm.
It is a beautiful, beautiful garden. And ladies and gentlemen, if you are anywhere near, this is annoying me. If you're anywhere near Pasadena, California, anytime, which is most of the year, that the roses are in bloom, stop by. Whether or not you can go into the Wrigley Mansion, and they do give free tours. You can see the gardens at any time. What is the name of that street? I know it as well as my own. Orange Grove. That's the name of it. Orange Grove. And it's up the street from the Valley Hunt Club, which is where the Tournament of Roses parade began. You know, this is one of these things you're just gonna have to get used to now that you're not living in the tower anymore. I mean, it's like you'll have to go to Altadena for their different festivals. You gotta if you go over to Sierra Madre, they're gonna have the Wisteria Festival. If you're gonna go, Chinese New Year is gonna come up, and they really do that big in San Gabriel and Alhambra and all. I mean, these are all local things. Now that you're not constantly surrounded in a compound, you should get out more and see stuff. Take your wife to see things.
Yeah, she likes seeing things, but that's so much like hard work, though.
The benefits, especially if your wife is on board, the benefits will outweigh the effort.
That's very true. Happy wife, happy life.
And I say this as a lifelong bachelor, but I know it to be true.
Yeah. All right. Well,
if they're happy, you're happy. If they're not, well. So, at any rate, seriously though, I love all that stuff though. You know, these local observances and things like that. And wherever you are, ladies and gentlemen, there's something going on. Even if it's, you know, a little Veterans Day parade of about 4 groups down the 3 blocks of your town. You know what? Get in on it. Gawk at it. Show your local pride. Join the Junior Chamber of Commerce, the JCs, Kiwanis, Rotary. Do it all.
Absolutely.
Take part in that Rotary lunch in the local family, the monthly Rotary lunch in the local family diner in the middle of your little town or suburb, whatever it is.
The Rotary Club does their lunch. What do they do? Is that like the Knights of Columbus or something, but secular? Or
well, it is secular, but no, it's for businessmen, and they basically for business owners. I mean, in your particular case, it would be more an Arcadia thing.
Oh, okay.
Just because that's where your business is located. The Rotary, the Kiwanis, and they raise money for different charities and so forth, and they try to influence the local establishment in favor of business.
Let's see.
I mean, and as with so many of these things, a lot depends on the local setup. You know, there are Knights of Columbus councils and Knights of Columbus councils.
Yeah.
And you really don't know what they're like until you experience them.
Yeah.
It's the same.
I see. Okay. All right.
All I'm asking for is a combination of aristocratic glamour on the one hand and down-home American babbitry on the other, and everything in between. That's all I'm asking for.
Is that
I want
so
a
much?
world. What's that?
Is that so much? I know.
I don't think so. I want a world in which the Order of Malta and the Order of the Garter, on the one hand, and the JCs and the Junior League on the other, and the local Boy Scouts and so forth, they're all part of the mix. High and low, top to bottom, upper class, middle class, lower class. I'm for it all.
Excellent. As am I. All right, let's move this on to the memes of production.
Yay! Nationalize the memes of production in 2022.
For the common good.
Also in 2022. It's a little rough doing it in 1993, but you know.
It's a very short memes of production. Just one comment from a person with the username Lassa7. He says, Monophysite New Jerseyites are the real problem. How do you feel about that, Charles?
I think it's about time someone drew attention to this. Right now, as we speak, our co-religionists throughout New Jersey, from Cape May to Nyack, or not Nyack, to gosh, we're almost Nyack, just before you get to the 76 house. Anyhow, they're all under threat. The Pineys, the Ramapo Mountain people, all these people are besieged, in a sense, by Monophysites running rampant throughout the Garden State. I've heard rumors that the Paramus Mall for a while was sort of in a Fort Apache situation, literally besieged by wandering Monophysite bands.
It's a problem.
It's a definite problem, and I think if the governor and the state of New Jersey are not going to take steps to end the issue, I think it's time. I think it's time for the people of Jersey to take things into their own hands, if need be.
Yes.
I think that the threat, and when I say Monophysite, I'm not talking about Armenians or Syrian Orthodox or Ethiopians or Copts. They're all fine, law-abiding people. No. And for the most part, deny being Monophysite. I'm talking about the hardcore, Eusebius was right, Chalcedon was evil, we're out to get you, sucker people. I'm talking about them. I want to draw attention to them in particular. I mean, firstly, I've heard tales of busloads of old ladies being held up and forced to refuse to accept Chalcedon. By leather jacketed motorcycle riding Monophysites. And I think this has to stop. This has to end. I think the time has come. Jersey's got to pull itself together and put an end to this.
Yeah, big time.
I think so. There's a small hotel in Jersey, whose name I forget, but it was the inspiration for the song "There's a Small Hotel with a Wishing Well." Rumor has it that a group of Monophysites was surprised not far from there. So Jersey, be vigilant.
Yeah.
And not just Jersey. I mean, I speak both to the Empire State, the Keystone State, and Delaware. Keep an eye on what's going on beyond your borders. It may start in Jersey, but it doesn't mean it's going to end there. Yeah. So, word to the wise is sufficient, especially in this new year.
Yeah. New Jersey, you're in our thoughts and prayers.
Well, that's actually quite true always. I got to tell you, I had the most wonderful reception in Jersey in the summer. I've still got very good memories of that time. And in New York and Pennsylvania, everywhere I went. It was a great trip. D.C., Virginia. All kidding aside, that's one other thing I'll say. We have a wonderful country. We really do. I'm so grateful I've been able to see so much of it. Isn't it funny how one of the hallmarks of the modern world is that you have a leadership in inverse quality to the country they're running. The better the country, the scummier the leaders. Isn't that funny? You see it in Europe too.
Yeah.
It's almost as if the better the inherent ethos of the place, the worse its leaders are going to be.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's a good thing Central African Republic has decent leadership. So, what?
All right. Time for the questions.
All right. I'm ready to be questioned. I've been brought in for questioning, ladies and gentlemen, by Monophysites in New Jersey. I'm being held in an undisclosed location underneath the Paramus Mall. I have refused to denounce and I'm saying this on the air, I have refused to denounce the Council of Chalcedon. There. You can't make me. I don't care what you do.
All right. First question is from Yusef, who says, How did the European economy work during the Middle Ages with most of the population not having money, taxes and such?
Well, that's a very good question. And the answer is very much in terms of kind. Taxes, such as they were, I mean, if you had gold or silver, you might be taxed in it, but you were taxed on what you had. And if that was agricultural goods, then that was agricultural goods. Also, the king, just as with the feudal leadership, the king had estates that were worked, and he got the benefit of those estates. In the beginning, that was simply what they produced. And obviously, as time went on and markets grew and so on and so forth, uh, that became the profits derived from what they produced. Today in England, the crown estate, the crown lands, are a remnant of that. In America, we have a sort of descendant of the crown lands, the so-called public lands, and these, I mean, at their widest extent, the public lands refer to everything owned by the government. So I'm talking about national parks, national forests, military posts, all that kind of thing, national seashores, and so on. But there's also within that broader thing, there are the areas that are specifically called public lands. And these, I mean, there is tourism in some of them, but a lot of them are just sitting there. They're fallow. A lot of them are mined. They have mines, they have crops or whatever. And the profits from that stuff goes into the hands of the federal government. So in the Middle Ages, the king basically financed his day-to-day activities of A, what he produced from his own estates, and B, the taxes he could impose. But let's say there was something that happened, like there was a war or an invasion or something. Well, then, and he needed more money, he would call the estates of the realm together because they were the people that had to pay the taxes. That's why, and in the pre-show, I talked about the estates and how the people that were basically stakeholders, guildsmen and so on, the nobility of the church, they were the ones who could vote. Well, a big part of the reason why that was because they were the ones at the end of the day who had to cough up the money. So you're the king. You need money because you're going to go to war, or you're going to be attacked, or whatever the case might be, or you need to secure. There's a famine in part of the country, and you need to try to secure extra foodstuffs to feed it. I mean, or there's a plague or something. What are you going to do? Well, you call the estates together. You make your case. You know, you need the money for this and such, and they vote it to you. Now, that is the beginning, the germ of the parliamentary system. But it was general for centuries before we ever had legislatures in the modern sense. They couldn't create laws. They couldn't do that kind of thing. Their basic thing was to approve new taxes for specific purposes. And again, the idea was that they represented the different people and institutions that would have to actually pay those taxes. Now, you'll notice something interesting. If you're not paying a tax, you're not actually voting on how the tax money is going to be dispersed. That was the principle that survived the replacement of the rise of a money economy and the rise of the modern state. There was still the idea that you only get to vote and put in if, in fact, you're the person from whom it's going to be demanded.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a certain validity to that. I mean, to this day, whenever there is a bond issue, even if I believe in what they're going to be doing with the bond money, like building a new library, I'm always in favor of that. I always vote no. And the reason why I vote no on bond issues is because I don't own any property. And bond issues are financed through land taxes, property taxes. I'm not going to be taxed for that. So to me, the idea of voting for a bond issue when I'm not going to be expected to come up with any of the money is tantamount to theft. But at any rate, that was there was a lot of barter, of course, during the Middle Ages. And the other thing too, I mean, people would pay for what they themselves couldn't produce with what they could produce. So, as an example, you would have very often in what were called market towns. Those were towns given the right to hold a weekly market. The various farmers would come into town with their vegetables, goats, sheep, cattle, whatever it was they had. And they in turn, they would sell these to the guildsmen, the town craftsmen, for things that they themselves couldn't make. And contrariwise, the people of the town would buy the agricultural goods from the farmers with things that the farmers couldn't make themselves. Now, as time went on, in addition to the weekly market, which was a privilege of certain towns, you had the fair, and that was usually on the feast day of the town. And again, it was given by charter. It was a grant by the king or the local lord that this particular town could have an annual fair, or 2 or 3 of them. And they usually became famous for particular things. I mean, there'd be all sorts of stuff available there, but like certain places had cattle fairs, and the big draw was that people from all over would bring their cattle to this one particular fair, usually based on the location, the ease of getting whatever it was that the fair specialized into there. So you'd have, to give an example, in Scotland, you had the famous Trysting Fair in Falkirk. And there's a song about it, the boys of the fair. But people would come from all over northern Scotland and elsewhere and bring their cattle to Falkirk once a year. And then other people would come to buy it. And then still other people would come to bring their wares. So in other words, although it was a cattle fair, woolen makers and people like that would bring their stuff. And then there would be amusements, which is where our idea of a fun fair comes from. So in other words, remember, we're talking about a pre-industrial period. People they're not taking to the railroad, they're not driving. They go by foot, they go by horse, they go by cart. And the annual fair was a big source of entertainment as well as buying things. And the chorus to the lads of the fair it kind of tells the story. It says, "Well, you can see them there, the lads of the fair, lads from the Forth and the Cannon Water." Those are 2 bodies of water nearby. "Working lads and lads with gear," that is to say, both working and well-to-do. "Lads will sell you the provost's daughter," meaning con men. "Soldiers back from the German wars, peddlers up from the border." In other words, peddlers coming from all the way from England to sell their wares. "And lassies with an eye to more than the kine." In other words, girls who are looking for more than just cattle. At the Trysting Fair in Falkirk. So the fairs and the markets were big, big, big deals in the Middle Ages.
Yeah, I remember from a previous question too, the concept of a tithe barn,
Yes.
a tithe barn, where they can't pay money, but you said they put in livestock and all these other sorts of
Livestock,
things.
grain, whatever they raised, those were the tithes.
Yeah.
A tenth of what they raised. I mean, obviously, there's always been gold and silver and coinage, but these have been more or less common depending upon the period. And as time went by, began to have more and more of a money-based economy. Then you had the rise of the banks in the 1500s and credit and things like that, and the introduction of the banknote, which meant instead of carrying around a lot of gold and silver, you could carry around notes. So let's say you had a banknote from a bank in Venice or a letter of credit that had a relationship with a bank in Hamburg. So you give the bank in Venice 5,000 ducats in gold. You make your way up to Hamburg. You go to their sister bank. You present your letter, and they give you 5,000 ducats in gold. And that's why, even as late as my boyhood, on our bills, the Federal Reserve notes, let me see. It still says this note is legal tender for all debts, public and private. But it used to also say, and may be redeemed in lawful money at any Federal Reserve bank. Well, of course, stop and think about that phrase for a minute. What's lawful money if it's not the banknote? Let's see, we've kept the ceremony and emptied it of all meaning. The silver certificates, which we still had in my day, could be redeemed in silver, and that's what they said. The gold certificates, of course, are long gone, but that's the same thing about gold. But the origin of our paper money was simply these notes of credit between banks.
Interesting. Okay, another question from Youssef. He says, do you think Africa may get new monarchies next?
Well, that's a good question, especially because Africa has lots of monarchies to this day. It's just that most of them aren't sovereign. In 1960, well, let's say 1956, well, 1950, Africa presented kind of an interesting picture because in North Africa, you had the Kingdom of Morocco, then the Sultanate of Morocco, which was divided into French and Spanish protectorates, but the native leader was still the Sultan. You had the Bey of Tunis under French protection, the King of Libya, the King of Egypt, who had been under British protection, was now independent, the Anglo-Egyptian Sudan, which was a condominium between Britain and Egypt, the Empire of Ethiopia, which was age-old and independent, the third oldest Christian nation in the world after Armenia and Georgia, and one of 3 imperial majesties still hanging around when I was a boy. But then, in terms of territories that were native monarchies, you had 4. You had Rwanda, Burundi, next to the Belgian Congo, they were Belgian protectorates. And then you had Lesotho or Basuto land then, and Swaziland, both surrounded by what was then the Union of South Africa, which itself was a dominion like Canada or Australia. Well, in the rest of Africa, you had either small kingdoms, or in northern Africa, the Sahel, you had various sultanates, which had continued under the British aegis or the French aegis or Portuguese, Belgian. And these survived not as sovereign states, but as protectorates, adjuncts. But those were only certain areas. And in other areas, you had no real political organization higher than the village. So Africa was a mixed bag. In what's now Uganda, you had 8 different little monarchies, all under British protection. the biggest of which was Buganda. And in fact, the Kabaka, that was the title of the king, the Kabaka of Buganda, was the first president of Uganda. Then he was overthrown, the kingdoms abolished, and reestablished in the 1990s. In 1993, they reestablished the different Ugandan kingdoms, but as cultural entities, not as political powers. Well, you have that all over Africa. They're usually called traditional rulers. And in many African countries, just as you have the House of Lords in Britain, you've got a sort of House of traditional leaders, which is either one House of Parliament or it's somehow connected to government vaguely. But in none of them is there sovereign power. And then, of course, Rwanda and Burundi, the kings were both deposed. In the case of Burundi, murdered. And the only sovereign monarchies left in Africa today are Lesotho and Swaziland, and then Morocco, and that's it. The others, and there are many of them, are all subjugated by various modern governments. So on the one hand, you could say it's already happened. They're there. The question is, I suppose, will they one day supersede modern governments? Or will the kings of Rwanda and Burundi be restored? Or the kings of Egypt, Libya, and Tunisia? Well, I don't know. There was an attempt with Bokassa in the 70s to turn the Central African Republic into the Central African Empire. But that was kind of a mockery almost of Bonaparte. It was a weird, weird deal. And then Bokassa, when he took to cannibalism, he got overthrown. People are funny like that. That's what did Amin in too. Even in a modern African country where their standards for governmental rectitude are sometimes somewhat low, when the leader turns cannibal, that's usually the beginning of the end.
Why? Why do they? Why do they have to do cannibalism? I don't understand. Is food not plentiful enough? I don't understand.
I don't either. My guess is that it's remember the people who are power crazy and come of certain cultures. I mean, let's put this another way. Every culture has a way of people being able to assert through it their supremacy. With us, it's having us put on masks and social distance and all that kind of thing. It lets the masters know that they're in charge. They've gone as far as they can go. But in certain cultures, cannibalism is proof of one's utter supremacy over everyone else. But usually it means you've gone a little insane, I think. And for some reason, your subjects, being neither stupid nor infinitely patient, they often see that as, you know what? I think it's time for regime change. Yeah. This is a little much. And so that's what happened to both Bokassa and Amin in Uganda. They got overthrown. Amin, though, was very famous for, and it's something I have endlessly quoted, calling cannibalism nutritional democracy. So I think there's something to be said for that. I don't know what, but something.
It's impressive.
Yeah, it's very impressive. I mean, Africa, you see, you've got a very strange setup in Black Africa, because the Europeans came, and I'm not talking about areas like Senegal and parts of Madagascar where they were there for several centuries, or Angola or whatever. I'm talking about the largest part of the continent. In the 19th century, the Europeans took over and superimposed their method of doing things on top of the existing structures. They then created a class of technocrats, locals, to basically power the machinery of modern governance in with and under and on top of this pre-existing superstructure. Well, these folks, these technocrats, were, on the one hand, because of their technical education, effectively separated from their former cultures and lost those values. But by the same token, there was not sufficient evangelization. And in fact, by the late 19th century, evangelization was often the last thing on the minds of the colonials. They didn't acquire European virtues either. So they didn't have the virtues of their own cultures, nor those of the Europeans. They just knew how to do stuff. And this was the class of people to whom power was given in independence. And the result, by and large, there have been a few notable and wonderful exceptions. Houphouët-Boigny in the Ivory Coast comes to mind. Number of others, the fellow in Senegal, I can't think of his name right now. These people coming to power was the signal not only for incredible corruption, incredible mismanagement, but also settling old scores, because they might not have absorbed their tribes or their ethnic groups' virtues, but they certainly would retain its enmities. And so in most African countries during the 70s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, you would have a dominant tribe that basically smacked around everybody else. And this could get really grotesque, as it did in Rwanda and Burundi with the Hutu and Tutsi and the genocides there, just massive massacres, which the West didn't care about because black on black violence has never interested the authorities, whether it's in Africa or in our major cities. I think that on some level they presume that they're not capable of anything better. And so, why care about it? Why bother about it? It's only when white folk get involved that people begin to care. Otherwise, if it's just blacks killing each other, well, so what? They can't do any better. That, I think, is the considered opinion of those who constitute the dominant classes in our world today. I have to say that if there was ever a grotesque example of our mistreatment of Africa, it was President Obama smacking the president of Kenya around for not being sufficiently LGBTQ friendly. I mean, talk about neocolonialism, talk about cultural insensitivity. The great white father in Washington coming to lecture the heathen. It was really one of the most disgusting displays I've ever seen in my life.
All right. Question from Todd, who says, what does Charles think of folk healing, especially the kinds originating from Christian nations, which incorporate elements of Christianity? I'm thinking particularly of, quote, talking out the fire, end quote, of a burn, wherein a person with the gift is said to be able to say certain prayers over a burn in order to remove the pain. In one way, it strikes me as the natural outgrowth of a truly Christian culture at a time when people actually believed in the power of prayer. In another, it seems like a crude and profane twisting of authentic prayer into a type of magic, or at best, a superstition.
Well, I would say that there's a lot to be said on both sides, actually. Your reactions are precisely the same as mine. And I'd take it a step further and say you could say the same thing about alchemy, science, and prayer. These boundaries, the boundary between prayer that works on the one hand and superstition on the other, it can get very, very weird. I mean, go into any botanica. I see a lot of the same sort of stuff.
What is that?
Go to any botanica.
Yeah, but
it's a store that sells religious goods, statues of the saints and pictures and so on, but also goes in for spells and magic and so on. It's very much connected to Santeria, which is similarly, the border between devotion, folk Catholicism on the one hand, and Santeria and voodoo and all that kind of stuff on the other. It gets cloudy in some places. What I have noticed, however, is that since the hierarchy in various places have begun downgrading devotion to the saints and Our Lady and so on, the growth in Santeria and voodoo on the one hand, and the rise in their remaining pagan elements on the other, has become quite substantial. And also, I have to say, the changes in the liturgy have not helped. Because obviously, where you've got the liturgy and the sacraments and all that in Latin, that produces a definite standard against which you can really measure everything else. But you get rid of that. So, yeah, I mean, I have to blame a lot of this sort of cloudiness on the current hierarchy.
Okay.
But there's so much you can blame them for. It's like a rich cornucopia of garbage.
Indeed.
And have you ever seen one of those big garbage things that the trucks pick up? You'll see them behind apartment buildings and so forth.
The dumpsters.
They're filled with trash. Dumpsters, yeah. Well, imagine the blame that the hierarchy have today as being like a big dumpster filled with crap of all kinds. Some of it strictly religious, some of it political, some of it cultural, all mixed together, different stuff, and all their baby that should probably be dumped on their front lawn as a tribute.
All right, Don from Florida says, with whispers of Pope John Paul I being the next post-Vatican II papal beatification, my question is, why has there never been any cultus or cause for Pope Leo XIII? While not knowing of his personal holiness, his encyclicals have had a profound impact on the world and seem more relevant than ever today. What are your thoughts?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, it's always a question of why is there a cultus for this person and not for that? It's hard to say. The case of John Paul I, of course, the current Holy Father, is very keen on canonizing all of the post-Vatican II popes. I'm thinking you should probably hurry up and canonize Benedict XVI before he dies. That way, he could enjoy it. Maybe canonize himself. But nobody else is going to do it. What? Anyway, so I'm feeling this air of cynicism wafting 6,000 miles away from where you're sitting. Okay. If you go to the Cathedral of St. Mary in Sydney, you will see statues of two bishops in front of it. Now, the one bishop statue was put in long after his death. The other was dedicated by the man himself while he was archbishop, because he knew that nobody else was going to do it. So he very wisely had it built at archdiocesan expense and dedicated it himself. Pulled the string, and there it was, because he knew nobody else would do it. So if Pope Francis canonizes himself now, it'll be the same kind of an idea. Brilliant. I think so. I'd love to be devil's advocate in that cause, I can tell you. That would be a lot of fun for me. Well, Holy Father, I realize you think you're holy, but let's look at the other side of you, shall we? Anyhow, I digress. So the thing is that a cultus develops where it'll develop. People think an individual is holy. They start praying to him, and they get eventually miracles start, and they don't. Now, Leo XIII You're right, he's very well known for his encyclicals, but he certainly had a spiritual life. He gave us both the consecration of the world to the Sacred Heart. He gave us the St. Michael prayer, which was the result of a vision. So, I would say that if interested parties started praying for his intercession, maybe something would happen. Start it yourself, Blessed Pius IX, of course, had a following very, very quickly. What you might do is get one of his prayers, one of the prayers for his intercession from before his beatification, adopt it for Leo and see what happens. The that Leo XIII certainly had a very deep spirituality. I think that's a good thing in a pope. It's nice when they're interested in religion and stuff like that. I think it's good. It may be unusual at the moment, but I think a religious pope is probably better than a non-religious pope, I think.
That's so true.
Well, it's like having a politician who's got some interest in politics, or a salesman who, would like to sell his product. It's kind of like that.
I see. All right, another question from Don from Florida. In your opinion, why have the Commonwealth countries, namely Canada, New Zealand, and Australia, had the most tyrannical COVID restrictions on their population? What in their history or makeup has contributed to these events?
That is a real good question, and frankly, it's one I've been pondering, because you're right. Canada, Australia, and New Zealand are just about the worst. My guess, and believe me, this is just a guess, if somebody comes up with something better, let me know. Their leaderships, collectively speaking, for the most part, Paul Abbott was a great exception. They're all three are currently run by scumbag people who are worthless garbage, and who are keen. Their active ingredient are, of course, my own generation, the generation of '68, who have always been keen on rejecting their national heritage. In Canada, of course, that's both the French Catholic aspect and the Anglo Anglican. In Australia and New Zealand, the same, both the British on the one hand and the British Anglican and the Irish and Scots. And it's funny, in all three countries, Scots Catholicism has a much bigger role than it does in the United States. Irish Catholicism, of course, we're familiar with, and you'll see Irish Catholicism in all three countries. But Scots Catholicism is very much a thing of its own, and it's much bigger in Canada, Australia, and New Zealand than it is in the United States. But there's also, as part of that heritage, mixed and interesting as it is, there was also a great emphasis on personal freedom, the frontier, going out, doing all this. These were all bound together. And the sort of worthless scumbag types that run those countries now, as part of their being worthless scumbags, have from the beginning of their misrule rejected the traditions of their peoples very consciously. We want to get rid of the monarchy, we want to get rid of the church wherever it's got any power. And I think the very idea of getting rid of the spirit of the voyageur, or the digger, or the swagger, that's very much in their little tiny worthless scumbag pea brains as well. And when I say they're worthless scumbags, I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean this in a very accepting, non-judgmental, non-projective way.
Excellent.
You see, often people will look at figures like that and say, hey, each of those countries has been ruled by really great people at different times, to say nothing about their having a pretty decent monarch now. But they tend to be run by pieces of garbage now. What's that about? My response is that a piece of human garbage in power has to be accepted for who and what he, she, or it happens to be. I don't think it's up to us to tell them how they should be as pieces of garbage.
All right.
What?
In the same vein, a question from...
Is acceptance a crime?
That's a profound question, actually. Is acceptance a crime? I guess it depends what you're accepting. All right. All right, a question from James. Pope St. Gregory VII, Pope Innocent III, and Pope Boniface VIII are often cited as the exemplars of what a muscular papacy looked like in the Middle Ages. Looking at each of their reigns and the reigns of any other medieval popes you would care to mention, are there any lessons that they could teach the current and future occupants of the chair of Peter in these ultramontanous and even, dare I say, papalatrist times?
Well, you sure could. You've got to remember that they were muscular for a given reason. And the reason was, in each case, because the faith was under attack. And so they had to throw their weight around. But they did so in each case, not for their own aggrandizement or their own little tiny egos, but for the good of the faith. The same actions in the hands of someone who's doing it to please his own ego would be absolutely reprehensible. You see, obedience, even ultramontanism, these are means to an end. They're not ends in and of themselves. And anything, when you take it away from its proper end and you make it an end in itself, well, you create a sort of idolatry. You create a road to evil. I mean, to give you an example, I believe that one ought to dress as well as one can when one goes to Mass. Why? Out of a sign of respect to our Lord. That's why. I mean, if you go to see some earthly person, whether it be the president or the queen or someone who can give you a job in a job interview, you dress your best as a sign of respect. But if that becomes an end in itself, I go to Mass as well dressed as I possibly could be in order to be a shining light to all and absorb their admiration. It goes from being a good and a good means to a better end to becoming a rather evil means in itself. It becomes idolatry. Neither, both rulers and ruled have two things proper to them. The ruler has obedience. The ruled has liberty. But in both cases, these are means to an end. The leader is to be obeyed for a specific purpose, which is the accomplishment either of spiritual or temporal good, the common good. Salvation or not starving, not being menaced, etc. Similarly, liberty is given to the subject, not so he can do anything he wants, but so that he can do what is right. So that he can do the correct thing. That's why it's given, not liberty just for the sake of being free. Again, it becomes idolatry, the way obedience does. So, what Innocent III, Gregory VII, and who was the other one? Boniface VIII, and for that matter, Blessed Pius IX, would say to any pope sitting in their chair, it's not about you. It's about God, it's about the faith and the church, and it's about our subjects. It's not about you, little man.
What if they just sort of conflate it and they feel that their will is God's will?
That is a terrible temptation for not just popes. And it's a temptation that has to be fought against all the time. There's a reason why popes would go to confession every day. And there's a reason why before Vatican II, at the end of every day, they would sign a note renouncing any liturgical errors they had made during the course of the day. So these couldn't be seized on as precedents. It's why when they had papal coronations, the Cardinal Archbishop of Ostia would set the tiara on his head, and he would say, "Know that you are the ruler of the world and father of kings and princes." And then a capuchin would have a burning brand and say, "Thus passes the glory of the world." You're the ruler of the world. It's all in flames. With it, it goes. That's why the Austrian emperors, again, the Capuchins playing the role of humility enforcers, when they would die, and this most recently in our own time with the late great Archduke Otto, they'd be brought to the Kapuzinerkirche, under which is the Kaisergruft, where they're all entombed. And the chamberlain would bang on the door, and the Capuchin would throw open the door and say, "Who goes there?" And he would say, "Otto von Habsburg, Apostolic King, Archduke of Austria, Apostolic King of Hungary, King of Bohemia," on and on and on. And then when he finished with all the titles, the Capuchin would say, "I don't know him." Slam. Bang, bang, bang. "Who goes there?" They would just say, "Franz Joseph, Emperor of Austria, Apostolic King of Hungary." "I don't know him." Slam. Bang, bang, bang. "Who goes there?" "Ferdinand, a poor and sinful human." "Him I know. Let him enter." But fortunately, the coronation was gotten rid of, and instead you have an inauguration, which, as with presidents, often does a lot to fill the inauguree with a sense of their self-importance. I mean, it's kind of like the Apostolic Palace itself. I can imagine why, if I were a mountain of pride, I wouldn't want to live in it. Because the Apostolic Palace is a constant reminder that popes come and go. And you could imagine the new pope sitting there looking around, and the palace basically saying to him, "Ah, there you are, little man. You are the pope." Kind of like, oh, I don't know, Innocent the 11th, Leo the 12th, Lando. "Oh, you don't remember them, Holy Father? Neither does anyone else, and you're not likely to be remembered either. Enter into your inheritance, little one." And I could see that if you were a big pile of self-importance, that would be the kind of message you would not want to have rammed at you every night that you went to sleep. All my predecessors have died and faced God, so must I. Not something a modern person, not let alone a pope, wants to hear.
Well, that's it for the questions. Can we make a U-turn or something and go to like a happy fun place instead of all this, dwelling on the steaming pile of perfection of us all?
Well, scheming piles of perfection are a lot of fun. But yes, there are several things we can do. Firstly, there are a couple of poems I should like to share with our audience.
All right. We like poems.
I do like poems, and these are very fitting. The first is a portion of it. Portion of it was turned into the "I Heard the Bells on Christmas Day," which is a Christmas carol. But they usually only have a couple of the uh, they usually have only a couple of the verses as the carol. This is the poem, Christmas Bells, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, written actually when he was sitting in his home in Nahant across Boston Harbor from Boston itself, and he heard the bells in the Boston churches on Christmas, and he wrote this. This is during the Civil War. His son was fighting down south, and it was not a happy time. I heard the bells on Christmas Day, their old familiar carols play, and wild and sweet the words repeat of peace on earth, goodwill to men. And thought how, as the day had come, the belfries of all Christendom had rolled along the unbroken song of peace on earth, goodwill to men, till ringing, singing on its way, the world revolved from night to day, a voice, a chime, a chant sublime of peace on earth, goodwill to men. Then from each black accursed mouth the cannon thundered in the south, and with the sound the carols drowned of peace on earth, goodwill to men. It was as if an earthquake rent the hearthstones of a continent, and made forlorn the households born of peace on earth, goodwill to men. And in despair I bowed my head. There is no peace on earth, I said, for hate is strong and mocks the song of peace on earth, goodwill to men. Then pealed the bells more loud and deep. God is not dead, nor doth he sleep. The wrong shall fail, the right prevail, with peace on earth, goodwill to men. I think that's a message worth remembering.
Mm.
The other is by a contemporary of his, Alfred Lord Tennyson, called Ring Out Wild Bells, in memoriam, portion in memoriam, which is a lot longer. Alfred Lord Tennyson. Ring out wild bells to the wild sky, the flying cloud, the frosty light. The year is dying in the night. Ring out wild bells and let him die. Ring out the old, ring in the new, ring happy bells across the snow. The year is going, let him go. Ring out the false, ring in the true. Ring out the grief that saps the mind, for those that here we see no more. Ring out the feud of rich and poor, ring in redress to all mankind. Ring out a slowly dying cause and ancient forms of party strife. Ring in the nobler modes of life with sweeter manners, purer laws. Ring out the want, the care, the sin, the faithless coldness of the times. Ring out, my mournful rhymes, but ring the fuller minstrel in. Ring out false pride and place and blood, the civic slander and the spite. Ring in the love of truth and right. Ring in the common love of good. Ring out shapes of foul disease. Ring out the narrowing lust of gold. Ring out the thousand wars of old. Ring in the 1,000 years of peace. Ring in the valiant man and free, the larger heart, the kindlier hand. Ring out the darkness of the land. Ring in the Christ that is to be. So, bad and annoying as things are, you ladies and gentlemen, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. If we do our part, do our duty, receive the sacraments, do the temporal and the spiritual and temporal works of mercy, try to evangelize, do our bit, then when we come to die, all of this will seem like a bad dream. And the real life for which we were made will begin. However, having said all that and asking you to look forward to a better future, I also ask you to remember the past a bit. Oh, you know what? It occurs to me. There is one other New Year's poem by Thomas More, not St. Thomas More, but Thomas More, who was an Irish poet, 19th century. These are all 19th century. Isn't that funny? That I think is also very appropriate right now, because it's very easy, ladies and gentlemen, to also to think of the bad elements that have happened, as well as the horrible future, the terrible past. So Thomas More has this response: when time, who steals our years away, shall steal our pleasures too, and memory of the past will stay, and half our joys renew. Then, Chloe, when thy beauty's flower shall feel the wintry air, remembrance will recall the hour when thou alone wert fair. Then, taught no more of future gloom, our joys shall always last, for hope shall brighten days to come, and memory gild the past. Come, Chloe, fill the genial bowl, I drink to love in thee. Thou never canst decay in soul, thou'lt still be young for me. And as thy lips the teardrop chase, which on my cheek they find, hope shall steal away the trace, which sorrow leaves behind. Then fill the bowl, away with gloom, our joys shall always last, for hope shall brighten days to come, and memory gild the past. But mark, at thought of future years, when love shall lose its soul, my Chloe drops her timid tears, they mingle with my bowl. How like the bowl of wine, my fair, our loving life shall fleet, though tears may sometimes mingle there, the draught will still be sweet. Then fill the bowl, away with gloom, our joys shall always last, for hope will brighten days to come, and memory gild the past. Also a message worth remembering. But above all, I leave our last bit of poetry, although not the whole poem, just the bit of it that we sing in song, to commemorate the passing of the year, and for which we are very grateful to your co-national, the late great Guy Lombardo. You see, it took these two genii, Robert Burns and Guy Lombardo, to make Auld Lang Syne the great song it is today. And as another year has passed and another begins, ladies and gentlemen, this is the beginning of our 5th year together, I think.
6th year. We started July 2016.
Golly. Is that 6th or 5th? It's the.
Oh, well, I don't know.
I guess it's the beginning of the 6th year.
Yeah.
Which we're putting a lot of time together, ladies and gentlemen, you and us. And it's been a great time so far. I mean, we've gone through some of the strangest times in my lifetime, but we've gone through it with our heads held high and with laughter never far away. And that's important. Don't remember, ladies and gentlemen, the devil wants you to despair, to hate, and to fear. The best way you can pay him back is to be courageous, to love, and to be joyous. Do those 3 things. Stay close to, as I say, the sacraments, the devotions, and so forth. It's the best revenge on the devil and his minions in church and state. And say a prayer in particular for his human minions, who are often hateful and disgusting, but also stupid and blind. And aren't we all stupid and blind somewhere? You can look at Pope or President or any other kind of person you like that begins with a P and think, well, look at how awful they are. And you're right. But bear in mind, their awfulness comes from where they are. And if you or I were there, we might not be much better. So pray very hard for them. Pray for 2 queens this year. Queen Margaret of Denmark, Queen Margaret II. Pray for their conversions, of course, but pray for Queen Margaret as she begins her Golden Jubilee year. I remember when she became queen in 1972. Old Frederick IX, the Sailor King, died. And he was a loss. He was actually very interested in the Catholic faith, was Frederick IX. So much so that at one point his queen had to reprimand him because I think over 2 or 3 months' time he'd only gone to Catholic masses. And she said, everyone's going to think you're going to convert if you don't stop it. So he started going to Lutheran services again. But it was interesting. And then, of course, Queen Elizabeth is facing the unheard of, literally unheard of, Platinum Jubilee. I can think of no other sovereign in history who ever had a Platinum Jubilee.
I'm excited for that celebration. I'm really excited.
Yeah, let's hope that Borage, allows it, and that on COVID it goes back where it came from. A prediction this year. I don't know how the governments will react or whether they'll, fess up and leave things alone. I certainly don't know how the Karens of our acquaintance will react. But my suspicion is that Omicron is the beginning of the end, and that on COVID will leave us by the summer. I could be wrong, but that's my supposition. Leaving in her wake financial wreck and a lot of resentment toward our lords and masters. Plus, they'll have kind of the problem of how to gracefully withdraw from total power, if indeed they do. So these are all interesting things that will face us in the coming year. I wouldn't be surprised if we get to see another conclave this year, and we'll see what kind of creature emerges out of that, and whether, as apparently the Holy Father suspects, he can't be trusted to continue the attack on the Mass. We'll see what happens. But whatever happens, it's all part of the passing scene against which you and I have to work out our salvation. So, again, ladies and gentlemen, be confident for the future. Stay close to our Lord and Our Lady and the saints and angels, and treasure their memories. Do you have that? Do you have that picture?
Yes, I'll put it up now. There it is.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a picture I posted quite a bit on my Facebook site over the past few years. It reminds me very much of my aunt's house in beautiful Mount Kisco, New York, when I was a child. It looks like the kind of parties that they used to have. Although nobody there really resembles my aunt at all. None of the girls are quite as pretty as she was. But I look at that picture and it makes me think of Christmas in my childhood. So, in that thought, with that on my mind, I will give you one admonition, or one question, I should say. It's a question. Should old acquaintance be forgot and never brought to mind? Should old acquaintance be forgot and days of old lang syne? For old lang syne, my dear, for old lang syne, we'll take a cup of kindness yet for old lang syne. Happy New Year, ladies and gentlemen. Happy 2022. But I got a question for you, boss, out of all this.
Go ahead.
Are you sure you're capable of answering
I'm
in a coherent manner?
Absolutely.
All right. If it's Monday,
it's off the menu.
And what about that soul you may be saving?
It may be your own.
Happy New Year, ladies and gentlemen, and we shall see you next week.